So I have a few questions for you. I wonder, who, as you were a child, a teenager, or perhaps now as an adult, most positively impacted your life? Or who was it that made you feel most loved in the world? And how did they do it? Well, in my own life, I have to say that it was my maternal grandmother. We called her Grandma Mary. And she was born in Melbourne, Australia, and was always, in the eyes of some at least, a bit of an eccentric, although I would have to say in a good way. As a school teacher most of her life, Grandma Mary could step up and be a strong, fearless five-star general of a woman when needed. But on the other hand, she was also one of the most beloved women in her parish and neighborhood because she was always willing to give of herself, regardless of flesh and blood kinship, in whatever ways the times and circumstances demanded. Now, while Grandma Mary was a bit of a disciplinarian with my mother and aunt, I experienced her as a person of patience, wisdom, and most importantly, unconditional love. She taught me how to read, ride a bike, tie a necktie, and so many other things. Grandma Mary helped me bind up my wounds, soothe my soul in distress, and lavishly dispensed warm hugs and kisses. She and my grandfather always had time for us before and after school, and sometimes we lived with them while my parents were busy with graduate school or with their careers. And as I grew, the particularities of our relationship changed as well. Grandma Mary had a knack for seeing things in me that often I couldn't see in myself, expanding the boundaries of what I thought possible. She always seemed to know how to relate to me in a way that spoke directly to my heart, as well as my mind. As a teenager, when other adults in my life were completely absent, critical, and dismissive, she quietly listened to me and helped me to seek the answers to my big questions. Grandma Mary always made it a point to let me know that I was always loved, no matter what. So I wonder again, who was it that loved you most or most positively impacted your life? I wonder about your relationship with them. Did they, like Grandma Mary, hold you tight through the hard times and love you with their hugs and kisses and words of hope and assurance? Or perhaps were they your champion in school or work, seeing wonderful potential in you? Perhaps they even took great personal efforts to steer you in the right direction, or they tutored you on their own time after school. Today, we hear in the ancient poetry of the Song of Solomon, compiled centuries before the birth of Jesus, a concept of God as the beloved, leaping upon the mountains, bounding over the hills, like an excited, silly, lovesick gazelle. Through the poetry of today's lesson, we experience God seeking us out every day, peeking through the lattice work, waiting outside the door like our best childhood friend, yearning to get our attention. Yes, God is always yearning to be in relationship with us each and every day, loving me, loving you, Kurt, loving you, Michelle, loving everyone, absolutely everyone, always, without exception. Jesus takes this a step further in today's gospel reading from Mark. He rejects human laws and prejudices that would denigrate and separate human beings from one another and seemingly from God. And throughout his ministry, Jesus shows us the loving face of God here on earth, where broken bodies and minds are healed of their infirmities, lives are transformed and turned around, and even the dead are raised back to life. As we continue to listen to the Gospel of Mark in the coming weeks, there's a growing recognition of our shared kinship as children of God, a shared divine DNA within all of us. As author and scholar Beatrice Berthaud states, when Jesus met a person, he really believed that God was somehow present in that person. So he looked for that presence through all the overlying contradictions to it until he found it. Then he addressed himself to that point in the person. As the Hindus also say, the divine in him saluted the divine in the other. When anyone does that, it tends to awaken the divine in the other, who is thus invited to speak from that place in return. Thankfully, my brothers and sisters, it is God who is always taking the initiative. It is always God who is working for our good. And this means that no matter what we claim as our imperfections of body, mind, or spirit, you and I are radically okay. And it's precisely there where God chooses to love you and I without exception. Sometimes, especially as Lutherans, we refer to this as grace, but I think it goes even a little deeper. Just as God the Beloved is always rejoicing in us and seeking to be in relationship with us, God's self is also given to us through bread and wine in the sacrament of the Holy Communion, so that through the stages of our life, we may be nourished as children of God, and that day by day, we may become more and more like the Beloved. But it doesn't stop there. Freed by all the all-encompassing and extravagant love of God, we can also be sacrament to one another and true stewards of God's creation, enfleshed divine DNA, one to another. So maybe I am called to become like Grandma Mary to someone, or maybe you are called to be like your beloved teacher or aunt or parent. Or maybe God is calling us to heal the divisions in our homes and society, or serve as advocates for those facing injustice, hunger, loneliness, and distress. Perhaps we are using our gifts of music, art, and dance to bring forth the face of God to others. Maybe we are called to help restore God's creation, the environment, the plants and animals around us. And in our own age, there are many, many great examples of ordinary people living out this sacramental witness. Martin Luther King Jr., Oscar Romero, Dolores Huerta, and Cesar Chavez, Pauli Murray, Troy Perry, William Barber, Barbara Harris, Greta Thunberg, and so many others. But what is truly important, as the monk and modern-day mystic Thomas Merton writes, is that you do not need to know precisely what is happening or exactly where it is all going. What you need is to recognize the possibilities and challenges offered by the present moment and to embrace them with courage, faith, and hope. Arise, my love, my fair one, and come away. Amen.